right, let's get into it. First, a quick thank you to the sponsors of DDD 2026. And if you haven't already, there's a bingo going on with some exciting prizes, so make sure to check that out. You've still got a couple of hours before the end of day. Before we get into things, let's calibrate a little. When we say the word product today, we mean the teams that deliver customer-facing products. When we say the word platform, we're talking about internal teams that empower and enable those product teams to deliver those customer-facing outcomes. So, platform, internal, product, customer-facing. A little while ago, I used to work as a data analyst with a team of epidemiologists. Epidemiologists are scientists who track the spread of disease and advise governments on public health policy, often with a sense of urgency. When infection rates are rising or outbreaks are unfolding, delays in decisions can lead to real-world consequences. So my job was to analyze the data and bring them insights so that they could make the decisions they needed to make. The ask was simple: data to insights to decisions. Or so I thought. Our data was a mess. Twice a day, we manually extracted it from a source system. We would then run cleaning scripts locally to do some basic transformations and get it into a shape that was usable for us. Scripts that were so brittle that they would break pretty much on a daily basis. And I would jump in, and other people would jump in to help and debug them. It was quite the pain. The CSV that these scripts would generate was often so big that Excel would crash. I don't know if you know the limits of Excel, but that's pretty big. And as the data set grew, this entire process slowed down more and more and became more and more painful just to get to a data set that we could trust. After all of that started my actual job, building dashboards, generating insights. And collaboration was a little bit awkward. You had to ask around if somebody had the dashboard file open before you could edit, make your changes, and save it. We were living in the 90s a little bit. A few months in, more and more people started to rely on this process to run analytics, build predictive models, and do root cause analysis. And that's when it really started to go downhill. Most days, it would take us so much time just to get the data out, there was barely any time left to analyze it. One day, after spending hours battling the script, I was able to get things working enough to build a critical dashboard that we needed. This doesn't match the other dashboard we already have, said a voice in the room. They were talking about two dashboards saying slightly different things. I spent the entire day working backwards, comparing business logic, comparing source data, asking myself questions like, were these extracted at the same time? Where are the definitions for how these were calculated? Where did this column come from? What is the granularity of these two data sets? Little did I realize back then, I was wanting someone to do the platform work of making data available and accessible, easy to use. Someone to do the foundational work, build the scaffolding for what I needed. I just wanted to do my actual job, but I was missing my village. So I want to know, have you ever lost an entire day to the build pipeline? Or that mysterious deployment script? That CI job that fails 1 time in 5 for no reason whatsoever? Or that permissions issue that no one is willing to take ownership of? On those days, you didn't ship anything. You didn't improve the product. You just wrestled the system. That's platform work. And when it's working, you don't notice it. When it's not, everything slows down. So this talk is about the invisible layer that determines whether teams move fast or spend their days fixing the build pipeline. That is what happens when the invisible becomes visible. Work that should have been done by the platform is now on you. Work that should have been smooth is now bumpy, and the absence of platform is felt.
When I was working for a large organization as a software engineer, I was on a platform team. We had a user base of over 700 internal engineers. So each and every one of these engineers could easily lose a day of work if we dropped the ball. If our releases did not achieve what we promised, our users, as well as their users, suffered the impact. My team and I looked after a set of developer tools, and these were composed of software packages. So anytime that we wanted to ship a new feature or a fix, we made those changes to the relevant packages, version them, publish them to a registry, and simply by publishing them to a registry, our latest releases were available to our user base. Each of our changes were required to pass a set of code quality checks. And this was a very positive thing for us. It meant that we could demonstrate adherence to the organization's engineering standards, as well as bake in some goodness of our own, right? It meant that we could keep our registry neatly organized by something called package scopes. And we could also ensure that every single change was properly versioned. Versioning is something that we found to be easy to forget to do, and we wanted to make sure that we were sending out those important signals about the nature of our releases. And we knew that versions are something that our developer user must know about and care about. So in practice, whenever we wanted to ship a new feature, we triggered a publishing pipeline that fired off a series of code quality checks, and the changes were published up to that registry, the feature shipped. Now, whenever a code quality check was failing, we would typically see an actionable error message. And that was a good thing, right? It meant that we could address whatever needed to be addressed and simply re-trigger publishing. An actionable error message meant that we had a good experience of a negative outcome. Now, let's jump back in time. I'm sitting at my desk, and I develop a new feature for a CLI tool that is used by my 700 engineers. My PM really wants to ship this feature. I've got my changes ready to go. They've been peer reviewed. So I trigger this pipeline, and the checks are running and running. All is looking good until I see this. So this is an error message that originates from a third-party tool. And this is a security scanning tool that is called Black Duck. Now, as a quick disclaimer, this is not an ad, not a paid ad. It's also not an evaluation of this product. So I'm looking at this error and thinking to myself, I've never even logged into this thing. And I don't really know what the Black Duck error message means by version and project. And I acknowledge that maybe me or somebody on my team did something accidentally wrong in order to violate some license threshold. I can also see that Black Duck is not very shy about telling me that payment is required. But I know I don't need to pull out my credit card, right? Nobody needs to do that just yet. But I do think about whether there is some sort of an internal chargeback model in place and whether my PM or my platform area is going to have the budget for this. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't actually really care about all of these details and these concerns. All I really care about is getting a successful scan result, shipping that feature, and moving on with my life. But I can't do that because I have to deal with this strange error message from a very cute duck, and now I gotta go on a side quest. All right, so my side quest begins, and I have some questions that pop into my mind, like, can I just generate a scan myself? Or is it worth pursuing some kind of exemption? So I pause and think about gathering more information. I think about what is it that I might have access to, and what are the sort of actions that I might be able to take. But quite quickly, I realize that I'm isolated and limited. I try to log into Black Duck, and it crashes for me. And I know that some team member a while ago had access, but they've long left. I also have no visibility on any scan results, and the internal user guides are difficult to hunt down. And when I do find some internal guides, I see that the key contacts haven't been updated in a while. And when I reach out to the primary and secondary contacts that are listed, I come to discover that they're out of office. So it seems to me like some internal security team stood up Black Duck, but then abandoned it, right? This is a thing that was stood up once and then forgotten about. My mission of shipping a new feature has been completely derailed. And all I can do is track on with this negative experience of a negative outcome. All right, so eventually I do manage to get in touch with the relevant security team. And then I try to get access to the account. And this turns out to be a bit of a mission. The security team and I have a bit of a back and forth on exactly how many users we can have on the account and the sort of details as well as approvals that are required for getting these individuals onto the account. I also take note that not every single person on my team is going to be able to get a login to Black Duck. And that's a bit of an issue because having visibility on those scans is a critical part of being able to do our day-to-day work. But I am finally able to log in. Still crashes from time to time, but at least we're in, right? I'll take the win. So next up, I need to restore the account. I need to make space for some new scan results. But then it's left up to me to figure out where exactly do I do this? How exactly do I do this? There's a spike in my mental load. So I do a bit of an exploration, try to get a lay of the land. I do a deep dive into any of the internal docs as well as the external docs that I can find, and I try to puzzle this out for myself. I then make a connection between our code base and Black Duck that I hadn't made before. I kept thinking about package versions having a close relationship with something called versions within Black Duck, but I needed to ditch that from my mental model and update it to focusing on this linkage between branches and versions instead. So at this point, it all clicks. I now know what I need to do and how to do it. I know exactly what I need to delete within Black Duck in order to make that space in our account. And once I do that, I'll be able to let a scan run against my feature and finally ship it. So I go ahead and do just that. I delete a bunch of old versions and their scan results. I'm relieved, right? Now I can finally re-trigger this publishing pipeline. I grab some popcorn and I watch these checks run and pass, and run and pass, and run and pass. My feature gets shipped. It's a success. Mostly. There is a catch. As my team and I ship more and more features and more fixes, those black duck versions will simply continue to accumulate. That black duck licensing error is bound to reappear in the not so distant future. Now, there is some work that my team could do here to prevent that error from popping up again. And if we do that work, it would make things a bit better for us, but it would have absolutely zero impact on all of the other engineering teams across this large organization that are also using black duck. So wouldn't it just be great if that bit of preventative work could apply to all relevant teams? Or better yet, wouldn't it be great if this side quest just didn't exist in the first place? Wouldn't it be great if all of these engineering teams didn't have these unnecessary spikes in our mental loads?
Wouldn't it be great if we never had that mental load? That mental load is usually the cost of missing platform foundations. When foundations are missing, every team has to pay the tax separately. Figuring out the right way to deploy, figuring out the right way to comply, the right way to observe. That's what turns core work into side quests. And a platform should prevent that mental load. That's where the platform as a product mindset comes in. Platform PMs start by understanding the needs of their direct users, the product teams. These product teams are trying to achieve something for the end user, and by building an understanding of that second layer, Platform PM can understand the bigger picture. And they can build a platform that not only solves the needs of their direct users, the product teams, but effectively enable them to solve the needs of their own users. So platform PMs tend to drive organizations to think of the platform as a product, bring empathy for the consumers of the platform, and drive them to apply the discover, build, measure, repeat mindset to the platform. And in practice, this takes the platform from being a reactive team that actions requests to being a proactive team that can anticipate needs. Thinking of platforms as a product has a compounding effect. Platform teams are truly sitting at the core, and each of the product teams that they support are building for a number of different users. And every improvement at the center radiates outwards. So if the platform team reduces time to deploy, each product ships faster. If they improve observability, every team is better equipped to detect and resolve incidents. If they surface data lineage, every dashboard becomes easier to trust. So this foundational work creates leverage, and the blast radius of that leverage is really powerful. Platform teams do the invisible work. They don't build the products consumers get to see, but they build the conditions in which these great products exist.
So for me and my team and our Black Duck side quest, work that easily could have been made invisible to us was now suddenly on our radar and tracked as a high priority work item. So I get to work. Right after I ship that feature, I switch into some long-term thinking. I think about how I might be able to prevent that licensing error from ever appearing again. And in the back of my mind, I also wonder, what does good look like? What would a good citizen or a responsible consumer do to manage their Black Duck account? All right, so I go back to thinking about that relationship between our code base and those versions, and I think about the life cycle events of our branches, right? Namely how and when they trigger scans, and then where those scan results would end up. And I do make a bit of a judgment call here as I solve this problem. I work out a way to safely replace old versions with new ones within Black Duck. And in doing so, I prevent the accumulation of those Black Duck versions. And at this point in time, we should never see this error again. Never again, at least for me and my team.
So in Laura's Black Duck story, we felt a lack of platform ownership of those error messages, the absence of the product mindset. It felt like it was treated as a one and done project with no clear ownership, no evolution, no feedback loops. Rewinding to the beginning of this talk in my dashboard story, I was missing a platform. In the months that followed, I was moved to a team tasked with building this platform. Having been on the other side of this, I knew the importance of the work that we were doing. And fast forward a few months later, my team built a data platform that took out all of that manual work from the process. There was no more manual script to run at 6 a.m. in the morning to transform data. There was no more guessing when the dataset was last refreshed because we had built a platform health dashboard. Where did this column come from? Questions were now answered by data lineage available within the platform. And there was no cause for worrying about duplicates because we had automated data quality checks in place. So the impact of all of this was that the data analysts were able to focus. They were able to do their job of analyzing data, building predictive models, and generating the insights that they needed to support the epidemiologists. The data latency had, in the process, dropped to under 10 minutes, and epidemiologists were now making decisions on data that was 10 minutes old rather than 12 hours old, and that was a huge difference. And with all of that, there was improved confidence and trust in the data because we could see the lineage. We had documentation, we knew where that column had come from, and data quality issues were surfaced and fixed much easier. So the result of all of that work was that epidemiologists were now able to make intraday decisions, not decisions that were days old, but within the day they could analyze fresh data and advise the government on public health policy. And as we have learned from recent experiences, outbreaks can move fast, and you kind of want the intraday decision-making. It overall led to better public health policy outcomes, which was a really wonderful win. So by applying that product mindset, we saw the compounding effect. All these different teams, all these different epidemiologists, overall improved public health outcomes.
So as a software engineer, as an individual contributor, I may not have the level of impact and reach to achieve this compounding effect that Bonnie described. What I can do, however, is think about the impact that I can have on me, my team, and our future selves. Looking after our Black Duck account and its integration with our code base is not a one-and-done activity. My team is going to be best positioned to deal with any future side quests if they are educated, and if they're educated well before the next release is derailed. So I educate my team by writing up some documentation as well as socializing that documentation. So some of the things that I capture for my team include what I set up and why I set it up that way, including those judgment calls that I had made. I capture my thinking around those life cycle events, for example, thinking about when we should add more Black Duck projects, when we should add more Black Duck versions as our code base expands over time. I also think back to the specific pages, right, the specific pieces of documentation that I found to actually be useful during my side quest, and provide some links to those. And then I also capture some unknowns, right? So as a consumer, I don't claim to know all about best security scanning practices. There might be some tweaks that can and should be made to our Black Duck account setup to better adhere to those standards. And I wouldn't want to know about those standards. I would want to get some guidance from a security team, right? And they could steer us in the right direction for assuring that all of our team members have the visibility that they need on scans. Another example would be to advise us on how to best preserve the most relevant scan results for auditing purposes. So we leave it up to platform teams to define and champion those best practices, to offer the right tooling, the right patterns, solid experience design, education, etc. And finally,
build the feedback loops that help them apply the discover, build, measure mindset. If you'd like to find us on LinkedIn, I'll pause here for 30 seconds, some QR codes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was awesome. We've got some time for questions. If you put your hand up, we can get the ball rolling. I've got one just here. Olga, you want to grab that one?
Hey, thank you for that. I'm in a product team. We interact with a couple of different platform teams. Not all of them do their job well. So they don't do what Laura was talking about, imagining what good is. Wondering what thoughts you have on how we can influence that, because one of the peculiar things about platform teams is that they are a natural monopoly, and so there aren't the kind of commercial pressures on a product team to do well.
I think one of the things that I find really helpful is when my product teams come and complain to me. So complain away. I would really say that if there is a PM in the team, if there are people with product mindset in the team, they should really welcome your complaining. They should want to know your pain points. Now, there might be a case where they don't care. And I think in that situation, it's a little bit like, what do you do about a team member who's not doing their job? I think that one I might take offline. But Laura, do you want to add anything to that?
I work on an internal tools team. It's not quite a platform team, but it's pretty close. And we get complaints all the time. So, highly recommend it. They're helpful. They're annoying, but they're helpful. One of the traps I see in sort of platform approaches to things is that the benefit of them is that there's one way to do things, usually, and the downside of them is that there's one way to do things. Do you have any thoughts about that? Like how to navigate that tension that's essential to that, right? The whole point is to make things invisible. But so many, and a lot of the complaints we get are, but we want to do something else.
Escape hatches. And it could be easy for a platform to overuse them or allow for the overuse of those escape hatches. Patterns are also handy. In my experiences, 90% of our users only needed to follow one pattern, and allowing for users who didn't actually need deviations from that pattern did create a bit of a Wild West situation. And granted, it's also easier to start with a clean slate and be overly restrictive to start off with versus deal with a Wild West situation later on. But happy to chat more if I didn't provide an answer to your question.
Hello, thank you for the great talk. How do you balance between doing maintenance on your platform, doing innovation and kind of working on like the next version or the next iteration on your platform, and then ad hoc requirements from product teams and other consumers?
I think there's the way that I think about prioritization is that it's an art, not a science. So there is no right answer in most situations. There is the answer that is most relevant or most useful, most impactful to your context. And there's a few ways in which I typically arrive at that situation. I think one of the frameworks that I find really, or mental models that I find really useful is the cost of not doing something now. So not doing something now, what is the risk that comes with that? What is the downside of not building this feature that product teams are asking us for versus this compliance thing that no one wants to do but might get us huge fines? And I think sometimes flipping the narrative from what is the impact of this to the cost and the risk can help you make those really hard decisions. I think there's also situations where, and this happens to me on a daily basis, there's also situations where you just really need to learn how to say no. And I don't joke about this as a data platform PM. I say no about 15 times a day. And probably yes, maybe like once a week. So practicing being able to say no, being able to justify that, comes from having thought through that, like, what is the risk of not doing this? What is the cost of not doing this? So could look at it from the impact side or the cost and risk side. And I could talk about this for hours, but in the interest of time, I will pause here.
I'm interested in your thoughts on measuring outcomes, because you talked about it's invisible, which is true, until it's not. And it reminds me a little bit, actually, there was a talk earlier about kind of people being celebrated for crisis management and recovering from outages, and people not being celebrated for the preventative stuff. Like, there's a risk that your work stays invisible and you don't get celebrated for it. Like, how do you make it visible in the right way?
One of the really hard things as a platform PM for me is measurement. And it's being able to measure in a way that makes sense to the people who have no idea what a platform is. Like, for most people, the platform teams don't exist until there's an incident or they really need like an access request solved. And I think measurement it's very hard to go from these are the platform metrics to these are the organizational goals, and this is how it all connects. So thinking about measuring from the perspective of what impact you're having on the product team is one way to think about it. So as an example, for a data platform team, one of the metrics you might want to measure is the time to first insight or time to first query. So if people are being onboarded to the data platform, you can't measure what the outcome of them doing things on the platform is as directly, but you can measure how painful it was if it took days for them to find the right people because those people were out of office, or if it took an hour to get the access request. They were in, they were then exploring the data, looking at documentation, data lineage, or the data dictionary. 3 hours in, they've run their first query. So I think thinking about the impact on the product team is one of the ways to start to connect it, because platform teams should be reducing friction. They should be making things easier. They should be making it easier to do the right thing. And yeah, happy to chat about that more as well.
Yeah, I'm in a developer experience team, I guess a fun subset of platform. We have the opposite problem of not getting enough feedback. We do user interviews, we do like surveys a couple of times a year. We still find it really hard to get people engaged, people to complain. Do you have any tips on getting more complaints or feedback?
think there's one way to get feedback is qualitative feedback that people are giving you by complaining in one of your Slack channels. There are other ways. Can you look at the consumption of your data sets? What other data is available out there for you to start to maybe make some hypotheses? How long did it take for this team to deploy this feature? How long did it take for someone? What is the usage for your documentation? I think those things can start to give you a bit of an idea for like, oh, this might be interesting to investigate. And it's a little bit hard when, like, I don't have a lot of experience with my product teams not complaining because, like, I work in a global team, and when I wake up in the morning, all of London has been complaining all night. So I don't know if I have a very good example of like them not complaining, but I think I would encourage you to think about where are some other ways that you can get some hypotheses going, and then maybe there are people you can find based on that data, people who might have taken 6 hours to deploy something, and maybe if you tell them, if you nudge them in the right way, they are ready to complain.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I also do some platform, I guess, and I talk to product devs all the time. Something I sort of notice coming from like open source is that it's more of a one-way street between platform and product. Anytime you want something, you just scream at the platform teams to get it done. I was just wondering if there are any tips around sort of encouraging collaboration, so it's more of a two-way street rather than one way.
User interviews are definitely one way to go. Like if they're only coming to you with complaints, maybe you can nudge them to ask about positive experiences, what worked well. So in my team, for example, we do once a quarter developer experience type of surveys. And usually they're like just a little quick Slack nudge because people are overwhelmed with notifications. But yeah, I don't know if I have a very good answer to that just off the top of my head.
So there is a technique that I like to use, which is called a cognitive walkthrough. So if you're able to get the time to spend and sit down with a product engineer, it can be a great way to tease out the difference between what they say that they want versus what they actually need. And having a product engineer step through their journey and share their thinking as they're interacting with the various touch points along that journey can be very insightful, as well as serve as a bit of relationship building. And I think through that more two-way interaction, that creates space for that empathy, and then it can begin to feel a bit less one way. And I think also sometimes product engineers might have a certain expectation, but have a bit of a blind spot with respect to how everybody else does it, or maybe there's a restriction or a limitation that the platform imposes on them, and they might not know why. So I think also meeting them where they are can help with that relationship.
Oh, hi. So you talk about crisis all the time. Well, this time, but what about the times when you don't have such a crisis going on with people complaining to you? Do you do a bit of refactoring of your platform, such as changing libraries, improving libraries, doing quality assurance, cleaning it all up and making it a little more streamlined as a platform developer? What kind of work do you do when you clean it up and refactor it?
So in my experiences, there was always plenty of work to be done. Like, sure, there is tech debt, sure, there is a bunch of refactoring that we love to jump in and do when we had the chance to do that. But I did work in a space where there was that demand for us to make it possible for our developer users to leverage the new features that came through from our core platform offering. So we had some third-party core platform offering. As new features became available, we had some pressure from the higher-ups to just go ahead and allow our end users to make use of those features. So I think we actually didn't spend as much time refactoring. It was a lot of time explaining why we cannot simply just turn everything on.
Final things to say on that last question? This question in the back here. Could it be a quick one? Thank you.
Oh, hello. I'm just wondering, I guess maybe to sort of address issues with awareness and things like that, what your thoughts are in terms of essentially doing internal marketing to your internal customers as such, and if that's something you've done before or if it's been useful or not.
The number of times I've gotten asked the question, what team are you in again? Is just wild. I feel like sometimes platform teams exist as the team that will help you in a crisis, and then you delete their contact from your phone. So I think it is a really important piece of work to do that internal marketing. And I think it's very important to build awareness for what platform can do for you. I think people really only find you during complaining time, but there's so much more that platform can do for you outside of that. There are all these resources, all this documentation that Laura has now written up, and I think it's very important, if you have a PM in your platform team, nudge them, if they're not already doing this, nudge them to go make noise about what you do, what your team does, what is the impact of that. And I think most importantly, if they can take really tangible examples, so like saying that my team makes data available might not be very relevant or might not hit with that sort of audience. But what you might want to do is really think about like, what would that framing be from their perspective? So if you need to analyze some data sets and need, user analytics run, you can come to my team. Being able to phrase it from their perspective, what are the problems that other teams need to come to you for? Rather than phrasing it like your service offerings, I find is really important in that piece of marketing as well. And then I think it is always an ongoing piece of work. Unfortunately for platform teams, we don't get a marketing team. So like any good PM, your PM is probably, should be, can be, will be wearing that hat amongst many other hats.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for answering so many questions. Let's have another round of applause for Laura and Bani.